And we have a recording. Be careful. Anything you say will be recorded. Next module, identity management. And identity management is, of course, about accounts, about users, about permissions, about roles and stuff like that. So let's look at what we're going to discuss in this module. We're going to talk about users and accounts. We're going to look at privileges and roles, but we're also going to talk about other security items and the identity provider scenario. We're going to talk about access to personal data, and there are 1 or 2 slides about a customer account transfer. Again, that transfer part, to be honest, I don't care for it very much, because again, the whole thing that I am opposed to talking about it because is the features in the platform, but if the vendor does not support it, or the vendor did not implement an API to do this, we can try whatever we want, but we will never get the opportunity of actually transferring a customer with that little button that we have in our platform. So this all depends on the flexibility and the implementation on the vendor side. I will discuss it. What are the pros, cons, and when can it be done? When can it not be done from our side? But there's I would almost say, a way bigger, I wouldn't say problem, but a way bigger blocker on the vendor side. So we're going to look at accounts and users, and this is something we did in the end users, but I want to go through it pretty quickly. Again, provider account is the owner of the platform. It is the one that runs, let's say, L0, the level 0 environment. They might have different people logging into the system. They might have an operations team. They might have a customer service team. They might have a marketing team and a sales team. Then we have resellers. Resellers, L1, L2, L3, L4, whatever you want to do. They probably also have similar teams. Not the same in this image. It looks the same, but let's call it similar, because a reseller could have named their teams different, or there might be an overlap in functionality. But when it comes to the fact that there are more people logging into the same account with different roles, no problem. I think we all agree to that. And then we've got customers. Customers have 2 types of users. They have admin users and they have service users or users. Admin users are responsible for the account. We can create roles if we want to for those customers and assign them. We can have a billing person in a customer account. That person is responsible for paying all the invoices that are coming in, whereas the admin is responsible for the subscriptions. The end users are let's say, the employees of that customer that make use of those services. Make use as in, I receive a license for Office 365, so I can read my email in Outlook. I can install those Office applications on my laptop or on my desktop, etc., etc. So that is this story. We've got admins, we've got users. Both have their control panel, and that is sometimes, especially from people like us who are working on the support and the configuration side. But an end user has its own control panel. They have what we call the MyCP. In most cases, we don't see that control panel. We don't use that control panel. We don't envision it. Why? Because the hierarchy when it comes to troubleshooting, etc., is the user should go to their admin. The admin needs to look into it first, and then if they cannot do it, they report to us. And we fix it using our control panels, and then the user can log into his MyCP. But they have a control panel. It's the same link. Whenever they use their user credentials, they get a limited user interface. The look and feel is exactly the same as the UX1 for whatever layer, right? It is that navigation on the left and it's the tiles on the right, and that's it. What will the user see? Their services and something about their login. They can change their password there for the platform. They can see what services they have assigned. That's what the MyCP is all about. Assigning new services to a user. Who can assign it? The account admin. And the account admin can do it two ways. He can create a new user and assign it straight away, or he can select an existing user. If, for instance, this user already has a license for Office and for Microsoft 365, but we now want to give him an Acronis license as well, we do that. And then we have a new employee that we create a new user for, where we assign in one go the Microsoft license as well as the Acronis license now. So our control panels, we went through that, and here's that service user MyCP again. Customer, or that user sees his services, only the ones that were assigned to him. The customer might have a bunch of other services. As long as they're not assigned to this service user, the service user doesn't have a clue that these services are available within the organization. So the next thing to talk about, because this is everything I already did in the end user training, privileges and roles. I want to dive a little bit deeper in that one, because that is more of an admin task. Because how often as an end user are you encountering the roles and privileges in a platform? Roles and privileges in Cloud WooCommerce are available only by giving. And what do I mean with that? There are other platforms where we can explicitly say that somebody can never do this. So whatever other roles and privileges this person gets, he will never be allowed to do this. In Cloud WooCommerce, it's not the case. You will always have the, let's say, the added privileges that you get through all your different roles that the admin has given you. So if for one role you get manage discounts and analyze sales, and for another role you get manage service plans and configure financial settings and manage financial documents, you are able to do the first 5 on this list on the right, because you're in those 2 roles. We do not support, let's say, blocking privileges. What is important to realize in this scenario is, since we have 2 types of panels, Classic as well as UX1, and on Classic we have operations and billing, you actually would need a combined set of 3 sets of privileges. The advantage is that UX1 privileges are operations privileges. That means that you need 2 roles. You need a role in operations that includes everything you're allowed to do in UX1, and you've got a billing role. And if you don't have the privileges in billing to do those things, but you do have them in UX1, you can only do them in UX1. And that sounds a little bit weird, but that's how we did it. We even have a privilege where customers do or do not have access to the Classic panel. That means that if I log in, I am automatically brought to UX1, and there is no link to billing, to the Classic panel anymore in my control panel. Why? Because the admin decided that what you are doing can be done and should be done in UX1 only. we don't give you access to, let's say, the advanced panel, because that is where the classic panel is a little bit heading at this moment. UX1 is the panel for day-to-day activities, where the classic panel is for the advanced user, for advanced tasks, etc., etc. So the average user would, from our perspective at least, would not need access to the classic panel anymore. Admins and maybe some of the product management people need access to the classic panel. For staff member roles, we need to, at provider level, we need 2 privileges sets. For the reseller, we need 2 privileges. Even though, and that is maybe the tricky one, even though at customer level you only have UX1, we still need to give you 2 sets of privileges. This is something we already discussed, that is a privilege. We did that in the previous module. This is something we already discussed in the previous previous module as well, so I'm not going into that. For being an account administrator and to be able to do everything, you need the full, at least for a customer, you need the full set of privileges on both sides. I need a full access role in billing, which is the full administrator, and we need to be an account administrator on the service management side. Let me go and show you those privileges and go in there for a second. Let's see. I am in operations. Let me log out and log in again. Making sure that I'm the person that I want to be. On system, we've got security, we've got our roles for each of those items. You see, for customers, there is an account administrator. For resellers, looking at the ID, it is a role that somebody created. So the account administrator is also the only normally available role. And for for the provider, there are 2 roles available: the account administrator and the staff member defaults. The staff member defaults is a little bit of a weird role. And why do I say that? Well, let's look at what the settings say. Look at the staff member defaults privileges. To me, it seems that this role, oh, there is one, classic panel access. That's weird. Yeah, it's a later privilege that is added to make sure everybody has classic panel access. So this one is enabled, and there's probably 1 or 2 more. But for most items, you will see that this privilege is disabled. Here's another one. UX1 navigation element implicit access. I haven't got a clue what they do. There are a couple of items here that are enabled. For the rest, everything is disabled. According to the documentation, the staff member defaults role has all privileges disabled. So initially that was the case. The moment we add new privileges to not block functionality, they decided that for these specific entries, these specific privileges, they set it to be enabled as well. So to work according to the documentation, I would have to go in here and switch off these privileges too. What is this one for? It's basically because initially when you created a user, you created that user in billing, and in billing you added the billing role, and then you had to manually go to operations to assign the appropriate role. And we were a little bit afraid that if we would give them the account administrator role, they could do too much. So we decided, okay, let's put a user in a role, in a default role for a staff member, hence the name staff member defaults, so he cannot do any harm. And when the admin has created the user in billing, he goes to operations and fixes, sets up a separate role for that user, or sets up a dedicated role for that user, and then assigns that role to that user in operations. That's why the staff member defaults role is there. That's why everything is disabled. The downside is that staff member defaults has also got this privilege disabled. This privilege says own CP access. That is what you need to be logging in. So my username is correct, my password is correct, and if I log in and I'm always logging into operations first, right? And then I'm logging through to billing. Even if I log into UX1, I log into operations. If I don't have own CP access, my username is correct, my password is correct, but and my account is active, but the system will tell me that the account has been disabled. Why? Because the access to my own control panel is disabled. And of course, this would, let's say, logically disable my account. The account itself is not disabled in an absolute sense, but since I don't have the login privilege, my account has been disabled as a, let's say, as a result of that privilege. So if you want people to just be able to log in, give them own CP access. Another thing is business automation access. If I only give somebody login, own CP access, he will log in and there will not be a billing link. For that, I need the business automation access. So there are a couple of privileges that you actively need if you want to be able to log in. Those are just a couple of remarks that you need. Of course, setting up a new role is quite some work. I did that also in the other training, but as I said there, some of these privileges are simple. You have it or you don't have it, but some of these privileges are a little bit more complex, where we have view, manage, admin, etc. If you want to know what the options are on these cases, go to the set of privileges, to the tab, and take, for instance, this one. Here we have admin and disabled, and here we have view. If I click this one, I can see what view means, I can see what manage means, and I can see what admin means. Be aware that this is not configurable. This is not how it is configured now, and I can change it. This is just a view of, this is what you get if you receive the view privilege. You can view domains and you can view all domains. View domains is your own. If you have manage, you can change domain registrar status, and you can view domains and view all domains. And anything on top of that will be admin. So I can create, I can delete, I can disable those domains if I have admin rights. So you can imagine, with the amount of 135 privileges, that setting up a role in operations only is already a challenge, because what would they need? for billing, it's basically the same challenge. Only the privileges are a little bit different. The privileges are just handing out, but you need to be able to combine them as well. In this case, we have 77 privileges. And here you see view details, create, modify. And I think, yeah, here it's always said. Here can you view customers' orders, and this allows me to create customer orders, close statement cycles, etc. But it also tells me that usually you should use this privilege together with the view. That means that if I receive create, I don't have view by default. So I need to hand out those two. The same thing for AR document. If I have a create and I created it, I won't be able to see it anymore if I don't have the AR docs view privilege. And are there any things that are very specific here? No. Most of these UX1 things and very strange things are restricted to operations. Then we get our security settings. Those were the roles and privileges. Before I continue, what questions do you have on those? Can I get a thumbs up if you don't have questions, please? Okay, thanks. Let's continue then. Of course, at some point you want to make sure that your customers are locked out or your users are locked out if they, let's say, use too many times to authenticate, make typos, etc. Basically, you want to protect against brute force attacks. And to be honest, there are two places to do that. And I would say that one is better than the other. We've got the built-in one. The built-in one is part of what we call our operations system properties. This is a list of all properties that we can have that we set at, let's say, at platform level. And brute force attack protection is one of them, so it's enabled. We have our password expiration history, prohibiting last password reuse. Here we have a session timeout in minutes. If I am idle in operations for 60 minutes, I'm logged out. And we have a user locking period after too many authentication errors, meaning that the customer will be 60 minutes locked, but there's also a setting for, and I'm looking for the numbers. Oh, here. Maximum authentication attempts before locking the user. So the customer or a user could try 10 times and then move to the next user without anybody noticing, because the 10th time it's not locked yet, the 11th time it's locked. The downside of this is per platform. What we have since is the identity service, where we also have brute force protection. First of all, I can do this by brand. Second of all, I have my settings together, and it's easier configurable. And that means that I can do this for my brand, and my reseller can do it for his brand. It may be a different set of settings. Password policies I can set here, meaning that I can set settings for blacklisting of weak password, prohibit username-based password. So if my username is Eric D, the system will prohibit Eric D2123, something like that. and we can require character types. Do we want digits, meaning numbers? Do we want uppercase, lowercase, special symbols? Is it required or not required? I can mandate here in a way better scenario than in the security settings of the platform itself. What are the requirements? I can do that for my own users, and I can set something for my child account users, for my resellers or my end customers. And then the reseller can, let's say, improve on that. So they cannot go lower than what I said as a provider, but they can have stricter password policies. The identity service. This is one of those things where we still require the classic panel because this entity is just there. Tell me, Ana Paula.
This is not available on version 25, right? I'm not seeing it here. Not even neither I can see it in data protection. None of those I can see here.
Yeah, they are available. However, let me show you. So this is the 20.5 documentation.
Yeah.
And where are we? Platform. It is an extension that you can set up on the platform. So if you don't see it, it means that you don't have that extension yet. The identity service is a micro on our side, also a microservice. It's also one of those things that could not be there.
Okay.
Just like the GDPR component, that one is also available as a microservice that can be installed after the fact of installing the platform. So you can add it to the platform. In that case, you can start using it from that moment on.
Is it part of the standard package price wise, or is it
I would not actually know that. So that is something to ask the customer success, your CSM. But the only thing I know that is that these things are indeed add-ons to the platform. Yeah, they're add-ons to the platform.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. No, I was talking about something here. Let's do this and let's go back to my control panel. I can edit this and I can just check what is needed. I can even set up two-factor authentication where I am using, if I'm correct, only either Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator to set one-time passwords on the platform. So I need my phone to be able to log in. About the identity service, here is basically the rest of the configuration. For those interested, I will type it in the chat or paste it in the chat. There we go. Another thing that the identity service offers me is use an external IDP service. And that means that we can do, for instance, single sign-on with Azure AD. We can do single sign-on with Okta, also a directory service. The supported directory services are here. We have those set up, but if a directory service supports SAML tokens, we should be able to integrate with it. Here we see that it's disabled. You do this again per brand. So if a reseller has its own brand, the reseller can switch it on for his environment, whereas you as a provider might not have it. If I enable it, I have to configure this, the certificates, the IDP login URL, if required, a logout URL, the display name, basically it adds a button underneath the login that says login with Azure AD or however you call it, because even though it might be Azure AD within the company, you might call it different. This is where you specify the IDP display name as you use it in your organization. So I would say this is a very powerful add-on that if you don't have it yet, I would at least discuss it and see what the options are for you. It could also mean that you because you're on 20.5, that you wait for the implementation of version 21 before you go and install this one. Ana Paula, tell me.
How does it work for the end user?
It's the same.
Because so the end user would have, let's say I'm using AWS.
Yeah. No, there are two things that you need to know. It will not replace the full login procedure as it is.
Okay, so it replaces the provider part.
No, not even that. There are two. The moment you enable an identity provider, the login for that brand has that username field, has the password field, and two buttons underneath. One to log in using username password. So if you don't want to add your users, your customers to your Azure, to your directory service, which I can imagine, they will just be able to log in with username password. And then for your employees, for your colleagues, you have the buttons use single sign-on.
But the buttons will be shown for everybody, right? So my customer will see the other button too.
Yeah. Or you have two brands. One brand that you expose to your customers. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you expose one brand to your customers and they are logging in there, and for your internal workers that do just the management of the platform and maintain and support, etc., you could add the another brand that allows you to do this.
Okay, are we going to touch this part in this train?
Which part?
The part where I can configure different brands for different profiles, let's say.
It's fairly easy. What you need is a domain name, a separate one, a separate URL. You add a brand.
Okay. Got it. Remembered. Okay.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, got it.
But that's all there is to it. So that means that from that moment on, you now have another brand, and since you define your identity service settings on a per brand basis, you can do that. Be aware, by the way, that your salespeople, if they create new customers, they have to add them to the correct brand. Because as a customer, you log into the brand. And if you try username and password on the same platform at the same level, but with a different brand URL, you will not be able to log in.
How do you do that? Sorry, how do you set
That means that your salespeople need to be in the same brand setup as
okay.
the customers they create.
Okay. I thought, yes, I thought they were talking about somewhere selecting the brand.
No.
It would be weird. Okay, got it.
Yeah, got it. Perfect. Mm-hmm. A couple of scenarios. And I want to look at this one. Of course, you could disable your users. That's fairly simple. You go to billing, you go to operations, you say disable, and you are disabled. Be aware that if I'm enabled in operations as an admin, but I'm disabled in billing, I'm still a disabled user. I cannot log in. I've noticed that with a demo platform that I was using. Somebody disabled my billing account and not my operations account. And the person that was troubleshooting it was looking at it in operations, and they said, yeah, but your account is enabled. And then I said, have you looked at billing? And he said, yeah, you're disabled there. He switched it to enabled and I was able to log in. Locked users is also fairly clear. The comment is clear. This one seems also clear. This one is also a very obvious one. An unforeseen error occurred. Okay, we've got a problem. Let's troubleshoot. The one that is
just one thing. I don't think we're seeing the screen that we're talking about.
Oh,
we are seeing the brand's
damn.
screen.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Let's go back to my
I was a little bit confused when you were talking about this, but I thought, okay, we're not seeing what he's talking about.
Yeah, true. That's the disadvantage if you have two screens, right? And you're sharing the one that you're not looking at. User is disabled. In UX1, customer account is disabled. Be aware that this also counts for billing. If I disable an account in billing, even though I'm logging into operations, I am a disabled user, so I will not be able to log in. So if you're troubleshooting something like this, there are a couple of use cases that you have to verify. Is indeed my account disabled in operations? Is my account disabled in billing? We also have locked users. That's a fairly clear one. It tells me that I'm logged because of too many failed login attempts. If I was not the person, I would at least report this because it means somebody's trying to hack into our system with brute force attack. If none of the customers can log in, we see things like that. It's just, okay, let's troubleshoot. The one that is maybe not obvious, but I already mentioned it, is I see the same error message as I see here. The user status within the system has been changed to disabled. So you have checked the operations account, it's enabled. I have checked the billing account, that's enabled. In that case, go and verify the roles of this user. And more specific, make sure that in his operations role, he has that own CP access privilege assigned to him, because that is probably the thing that blocks him from logging in. Our security settings for password quality. We also have two sets. I don't like this one, so I'm skipping it. I want you to go to that identity provider. If you don't have that, as you said, of course, under security and operations, I can set a password quality. And that password quality is basically either of the two. We don't have password validation. You can use a blank password. You can use 5 A's if you want to, or you set a strong password. But it's always 7 characters. I cannot configure anything else. So that is why I would say, if you want to have a secure setup, go to operations, make sure that identity service is installed and configure it there. Make sure that the identity service is, of course, the source of your identities. Because that's the first thing you need to do. You have to make sure that the IDP is an enabled status. The first time you do that, it takes some time for this to process, because it's a microservice, as I said. It's a microservice with its own engine and its own database. That means that the moment I'm enabling this, all users with all their data need to be copied to that new database. In the meantime, customers can still log in and log out, et cetera, but eventually it will show enabled. At that point, it means that all those users are transferred to that new database and we're using them there. And in that case, you can set your password policy better. You can set your brute force attack better. And of course, you can set your single sign-on in a better way if you want to. Password expiration policy, of course, is also managed by, in that case, IDP. Here we are, password expiration. It's either your whole identity is managed by the IDP service, or it is all internally managed. Internally managed means there are two spots. For brute force protection, you have system properties, and for the rest, if you go to setup, your password quality is set here. Password expiration policy is set there. So it's up to you what you want. I think that when you look at the identity service, identity provider, it's more flexible, it's better. That's when we start talking about the identity provider. It's a solution based on an open source project called Keycloak. What we wanted is an identity provider that had at least these three things, still the same login form. So we wanted something where the login form would not be forced upon you by the identity provider's login form. Keycloak is such a thing. We want an extended password policy that I showed you, and the capability of setting up two-factor authentication. Like I said, and I already showed it to you, we can set a more granular password quality. I can set a different password length than just 7 or none. We can blacklist weak passwords. We can prohibit those user-based passwords. We can define which character types to use for the password. For each of them, we can say, okay, digits are mandatory, uppercases are mandatory, lowercase are mandatory. Special symbols, leave it out. If you want to use them, use them. If you don't want to use them, don't use them. Or you check that box as well, which means that you have all those 4 character types as mandatory things inside your password. Password policy expiration, we set there. The number of previous password to prohibit, we can set. So here are the settings. And like I said, we can enforce two-factor authentication. I think that FreeOTP is still there, Google Authenticator is still there, and Microsoft Authenticator is now also part of the portfolio if you want to. You bind your device with the service by the first time you log in, when one-time password is enabled, to scan this QR code with either, in this case, FreeOTP, Google Authenticator, or Microsoft Authenticator. The screenshot is a little bit older. With your phone, from that moment on, your phone and the platform. Of course, you give the feedback. You have the one-time code that you get at that point. You fill it out. You click submit, and now your phone and the one-time password tool on the platform are bound together. And from that moment on, you can only log in using your phone when you have your phone at hand. The flow is here. Integration with other directory services. This slide is fairly old because we support Okta now. We support Azure AD. What more do we support? Let me go to that page, because there are more items that are supported. Azure AD, Google Workspace, Okta. And actually, we have the confirmation that we're allowed to say it, that as long as the authentication or the directory service supports SAML tokens, it is a supported solution. The only thing is we don't have a description for it, but there's probably one of the descriptions that can help you figure out what you need to set up. The thing is, this is done by brand on a per brand basis. And at that point, the users can choose an authentication method. And let me go back and show that to you. The users can choose an authentication method in the login form. themselves. So either built-in or external IDP login via Azure AD, for instance. Of course, as Ana Paula legitimately said, does this mean you have to add your customers to your Azure AD? No, you can leave them in. In that case, they will be in the Keycloak database, and they will just log into the built-in authentication provider, whereas your colleagues can log in to Azure AD. Actually, I can imagine that might be at least a little bit confusing for your customers. On the other hand, I see it more and more in lots of those, let's say, enterprise SaaS services where there is a possibility to log in username and password, but also the possibility to log in via single sign-on. And in most cases, for me, it is pretty clear which one I need to take. Or I try one, and if it works, I try. If it doesn't work, I try the other way. So not sure if this is necessarily a reason to create a separate brand. And then access to personal data. Again, there are two things here. First of all, you can disable access for people who you think should not have access to sensitive information or personal data. Address information, birth dates, etc., are sensitive information. And since that information is available in operations as well as in billing, I need to make sure that that sensitive information can only be seen by the people who should be allowed to see it by handing out these two privileges. The first one, view sensitive information in CCP v2, which is the old name for UX1, is the operations version of the privilege, and access sensitive personal data is the billing equivalent. And if I have both, I can see that information. If you have the GDPR module installed, you can also do this, personal data anonymization. So the process in that is a person that wants to be anonymized. It could be a personal account. It could also be a business account's user, an admin that leaves that company, can do an anonymization request. Meaning that that request goes to what we call the data protection officer. There needs to be somebody with that role. The moment you add GDPR to that to the platform, you will be asked, okay, who's the data protection officer, and assigned that will assign the appropriate privileges. That data protection officer can go to what we call the data protection application, where he or she will make sure that the appropriate anonymization is done. In operations, in billing, eventually even in system modules, there are still items that require manual input because they are not because they are external databases. Of course, we can manage what we manage with the platform. If there are modules that have their own storage, let's say cloud infrastructure, automation, or internal services that have their own user base, you might need to delete that confidential data there as well. What are the requirements for anonymization? Well, basically that the account is not an active account anymore, or the user is disabled. Of course, if we completely want to anonymize the whole object, account, and users, of course, both scenarios need to go. The account needs to be canceled and the user needs to be disabled. Which means if we cancel the account, that there should not be active subscriptions or orders or other items. If it's a reseller, of course, no active customers available in that account. And we want to do the users first before we can anonymize the account. There are a couple of things that are necessary in this case. Because since we also log information for auditing purposes, for security purposes, etc., only in the, let's say, active, constantly visible database, these users are anonymized. The ID is still there, and the data protection officer is always able to find out who was user 1,512,000. Because if after that anonymization, you see that there have been data breaches and user 1,512,000 was the person that used that data, we need to know who to talk to. So that is a key thing. From a generic perspective, that information is removed, but we will be able to gather that information from a separate database where the data protection officer is the only one that has access to it. Besides that, we can do GDPR. First thing we need to do is we have to enable it in the system properties. At that point, we get the privacy policy option under the core settings available. Let me show that to you. In operations, under system settings, I have a privacy policy here. That is because I have GDPR support enabled. If I disable this one, I'm losing the GDPR privacy policy here. In that case, there will only be 3 options. In the privacy policy, I can force people to accept the privacy policy by enabling this option, and we have the actual privacy policy completely written out here. I can change the setting to enable or disable, or I can edit the text. Those are 2 items. And I love the fact that we have a huge text and that we get a window for, let's say, 2 postmarks, and that's about it. If you change it and you want to save it, it depends on what you changed. If there's new information, I would save it as a new version. That means that the next time a customer logs in, he has to approve it again or confirm to it. If you just change some interpunction, like where there was a comma, there has to be a period, I can update the current version. In that case, your customers don't need to confirm to the acceptance anymore. So, an interesting setting. Another thing we have in the GDPR thing is the data portability. You can see what the system knows about you based on either customer or user ID or the email address of the person that you want to know this from. And you have a screen, and then you can either export the data as a PDF, which means that you can read what's there. And if you want this data for input in another system, you can also export the data as a JSON file. So somebody else can import that information. Another thing that it shows is whether or not it can be erased. In other words, are there subscriptions bound to it? Are there open invoices, etc., etc.? And we can see whether or not the privacy policy was accepted by this person. And then we've got the customer account transfer. Like I said, I prefer not to talk about it too much, but let's look at the principle of it, because the idea behind it is very good. Like I said, the downsides are that not all vendors support a move from a customer from one reseller to the other, or from a provider to a reseller, etc. In which case, it's fun that the Cloud Blue offers it, but if it fails on a service, we're still as far as we were before that we created that option. So who and where can you transfer accounts? Well, you can transfer accounts within your hierarchy. And for the provider, that means I can move a customer from any place to any place. So what I could do is I could move a customer from here to here if I want to. From a reseller perspective, I can only move from here to here or from here to there if I want to, because that is the hierarchy that the reseller is in charge of. That even means that these resellers, sub-resellers, let's call them, are not capable of moving customers, transferring customers, because they don't have a hierarchy. They are, let's say, for the customer's point of view, the endpoint in the hierarchy. There are two transfer modes, and the transfer modes are the bottom sentences, these, that one and that one. I can transfer the customer with subscriptions only, or I can transfer a customer with subscriptions, terms and condition, acceptance history, and the payment methods. The idea is it depends on whether or not you transfer a customer within the same legal entity. Legal entity as in we have two vendors, two reseller accounts, one for US dollars and the other one for euros. And this customer wants to, no, that's not a good example, sorry. We've got, yeah, that's a better one. We've got two resellers, one in euros in the Netherlands and one in euros in Germany. And this customer is now moving from the Netherlands. Their headquarters is going from the Netherlands to Germany. So they just want to be with our German subsidiary, so we can transfer them. In that case, it's still my entity, so we can do terms and condition, acceptance history. We can add payment methods if required, etc., etc. Whereas if I would transfer a customer from one reseller to another, why? Because the first reseller, for instance, is going out of business, because he's bankrupt or whatever. You might want to force him to at least see all the new terms and conditions of his target reseller. The requirements. And like I said, this is where it goes wrong in most cases. But of course, everything should be handled. There should be no unprocessed financial documents. There should be no incomplete orders, except WZ. What does it mean? WZ means waiting for payment after provisioning. So that means that at least the product is provisioned. They're still waiting for the invoice to be generated. Why is that? Because this customer has a consolidated invoice, meaning that they are invoiced once a month. The reseller has the client account resource, meaning that the client, the reseller, is still capable of receiving new customers. That's what it says there. And that is why the initial example that I wanted to give with US dollars and euros is not a good example, because both resellers should have the same currency, at least for now. We are working on that. But these are the requirements to be able, at least on our side, to transfer a customer. This is where, like I said, most things go wrong. If you transfer the payment method, and for instance, it's a credit card, if the You have a source vendor, sorry, a source reseller and a target reseller. If the source reseller supports Visa cards and the target reseller does not support Visa card, we are not transferring that. We are not transferring that payment method. We are not storing a credit card that he cannot use there anyway. If they use the same payment method, Visa and Visa, and the new vendor, and they're both using their own accounts towards the Visa payment provider, it could mean, not always, but it could mean that the customer needs to enable his payment a second time, because the token that might be stored for that payment method is valid for another merchant, for another reseller. So the payment will fail. Not always, depends on the card, it depends on the payment provider, but that could be something that you encounter. So you have to warn your resellers that if you are transferring customers to them, including the payment methods, that they have to warn their customers that these things might happen. So what questions do you have on the identity module? If not, please give me a thumbs up. And it looks like there are no questions. I'm going to stop the recording in that case. And let's take a 12-minute break.